Welcome to the Autosportradio.com 2022 show. I'm your host, Don Kay, and we are once again down at the Speedway Cable TV studio recording this. We have a special guest coming today, but the program is being brought to you by the Indy Dental Group. Indy 500 veteran Dr. Jack Miller and his wife, Dr. Liz Lewis, have a spectacular and one of the largest practices, most respected dental practices in the state. I highly recommend it. These people are the best, actually. And when my wife likes to go and looks forward to going there, I got to tell you something. If you need dental work, or you think you need it, or you need to get your checkup, call and make an appointment. You'll be glad you did. The number is 317-846-6125. That's the Indy Dental Group, 317-846-6125. You need insurance for a new car or a house or whatever you need. Your valuables, VP Insurance, located at 5004 West 16th Street in Speedway, is the place to go. Give them a call, tell them what you need, and they'll help you out with whatever you're looking for. Call Mike or Tom at 317-248-0070. That's VP Insurance in Speedway. Are you aware that the Trans Am Series is back alive and well again? Well, it's booming. Tony Perella, the owner of SVRA, owns Trans Am and has built it spectacularly. I highly recommend you go to their website, svra.com, and click on the schedule tab, find out where they're running. If they're anywhere near your area, I highly recommend you go. It's when they run the Trans Am, when they run the vintage cars. It's a phenomenal thing. And while you're there, you might want to subscribe to the Speed Tour magazine. It covers all kinds of things, including some of the drivers you might have known as a kid. They're back racing again. So check it out. That's svra.com. Trans Am, TA2, and the Sports Car Vintage Racing Association, all one big happy group. Check them out. I have a very special guest today joining us. He has been involved in motorsports in one way or another for many, 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 many years. We'll cover some of the things he's done, but his last stop in Indianapolis, he was the vice president of media and marketing at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. He is now also an author, an accomplished author, I might add. Please welcome Mr. Mark Dill. Mark.
Hi, Don, and thanks for having me on. You've always been a good friend.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Now, let's just kind of review. How did you get started in racing? Did you drive go-karts as a kid? Your dad said, here's your play toy, go out play. How did you get involved in the sport?
My parents supported me as a fan, but they discouraged any idea that I would actually race a car. And I was born in Indianapolis, so I latched onto it just like my grandson at a very young age. And I was the leader in the family. And then we started going to the 500 and so forth. And in college, I was news director at IRP. And after that, I was on my own. I had some money. I decided I wanted to start racing myself. So I bought a G Production sports car. It was a Triumph Spitfire, and raced that out in Southern California. And I will note, I was on the track with Rick Mears at one point, and also Paul Newman. So, I was no threat to them, but it's pretty cool because we're all fans, right? And so after that, it was a choice between sleeping in my car or trying to get serious about a career. And I just went to work, applied my education, and I got into public relations. Writing is my core skill set, and I moved up through the ranks. When I got to the point where I was an executive at Nortel, I was able to convince the board, hey, we've got a marketing plan here about high-speed networks and advanced technology. Doesn't that sound a lot like an Indy car? And believe it or not, they bought off on it. So we sponsored Scott Goodyear for, 5 years? And because he was Canadian, the company was Canadian, that made it easier to sell. And then also as a one-off, which was a pretty lucky one-off, we sponsored his teammate, Arie Luyendyk, in 1997 at the Indy 500. and they finished 1-2, so it didn't get much better than that. And I mean, that was the first time since what, 1949 with the Blue Crowns that one sponsor had finished first and second. And so that was great. And I got to go to Victory Lane, and Ari wasn't even sure who I was because we were just engaging him, and he looked at my hat and said, "Nortel, you had a heck of a day." And he gave me a swig of the milk. And so I never in my wildest dreams thought I'd be in Victory Lane drinking some milk, although I fantasized about it when I was a kid. So, and then I was at the Speedway a few years later. I also helped Howard Kroplick, who's a guy I know you'd enjoy meeting. He's the Donald Davidson of the Vanderbilt Cup, and I helped him write his book, The Vanderbilt Cup Races of Long Island, where he lives. And I'll tell you, that guy was very successful at Pfizer, helped introduce Viagra, which, was a financial boom. And, if he wanted to, he could own an IndyCar team now. I mean, he's that well set. But he had a passion for the Vanderbilt Cup and telling its history, and we just ran across one another, and he kind of hired me to do the bulk of the writing. And but I've done other things. I've written for Racer, for other the Indianapolis Motor Speedway programs. Lots of, always from a history angle. And when after I left the Speedway, I probably wasn't gone a month, and Tony Perella, who I had met by inviting him to come to the Speedway because I had a vision for a Goodwood style event at the Speedway. And Tony, I looked at the landscape with vintage racing, and it was, it's tough. It's just people that I really have a club mentality as opposed to a business mentality. And of the couple of people whose names will go unmentioned that had a business mentality, I thought they'd probably bamboozle me and pick our pockets. So I met Tony, and immediately I knew this was the right guy. He's smart as a whip, and he's just trustworthy. I could just sense it on our first meeting, and so a guy that I could work with. But anyway, not too long after that, I left the Speedway, and then Tony calls me, "What are you doing?" And he brought me on at SVRA, and I helped him get the SVRA show at the Speedway. He had a lot of kind of organizational chart maneuvering, and I understood who he needed to talk to. So that worked out, and they're coming back again next year on Father's Day. So that'll be really cool to see. And but I'd always wanted to write a book, and I spent years on and off, and I'd set it aside for years, and I, too busy with other things, and finally finished it a couple of years ago. It came out in early 2021, The Legend of the First Super Speedway. And I've gotten a lot of great feedback from that. So grateful, met so many nice people that really, tells me they really enjoyed the book. And it's a true story, but I wrote it as a novel. And so you really engage the personalities of the time. And then I wanted to paint the tapestry for the setting of early 20th century America, which has always intrigued me anyway. And but then, actually my wife Esther brought it up to me. Well, there needs to be more focus on introducing really young people to auto racing, and especially the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Why don't you write a children's book?
Well, I'm going to interrupt you quickly.
Sure.
Before you get to that, everything that I've ever seen that you publish or put out or expose is all of the early years of the Speedway. You're not into the 90s and 2000s. You're into the 09, 10, 11, 12, into the 20s and stuff. What is your fascination with the early years of the Speedway, other than what it took to build it. When you read the legend of the first super speedway, you'll find out the group of guys, what they did, how they did it, how they finagled themselves, that got the property and all that kind of thing. But what's your attraction to the early years of the speedway and the 500?
Well, like I said, it was the whole time period. I mean, I think Teddy Roosevelt was a really interesting president. And so the whole context has always just done something to me. I don't know, maybe I was I was born then and reincarnated here, not in this era, but I like entrepreneurs, and of course I love auto racing, and the idea of, well, how did all this get started? Too much of the time I felt that what little bit of recognition the early guys got was in May, exclusively in May, and it was kind of like a cardboard stand-up. Oh yeah, Carl Fisher and the other founders, and they did this, and that's it. That's about all they say. Well, it's like, hey, these guys were powerful personalities, and it isn't like they all always got along. I mean, that's just human nature. So what were their foibles? And then what was the network, the larger network? And Carl and Barney were friends. They had their differences too, but I mean, both of them weren't the easiest guys to get along with. But they were friends from the 1890s during the bicycle days. They competed on those wood tracks that were built just for bicycles, and like the Newbie Oval that was in Indianapolis. And I just started digging deeper, and that's when I started my website, firstsuperspeedway.com. And I think I've said this to you before. I've got more content, original content on that site than you'll find anywhere else in the world. I mean, maybe that's because nobody cares, but I get, Google Analytics tells me I've got about 20,000 unique visitors to firstsuperspeedway.com. So somebody out there cares. And, and I've got a good following on my Facebook page for First Super Speedway. And I appreciate, this year was my 50th Indy 500. And so I guess you could say I'm committed. And I was able to bring my 5-year-old grandson to it. That was the first time that he'd actually attended, and he's a race car nut. And it was just really cool. My 50th and his first.
Yeah, and I got to think when you came, he wouldn't let go of it, so you had to bring him.
Yeah, well, he was enthusiastic. He was wondering where, he calls me Pop, where's Pop going? Of course, the rest of the family, and usually somebody would stay behind with him and listen to it on the radio. But then this year his parents said, now we think he's old enough, let's do it. And he stayed and watched the entire thing. He got up from his seat with his dad one time to go to the restroom. I mean, everybody gets a bye for that. And but he watched the whole thing. And I mean, how many kids? It's not like he has a tremendous attention span. He'll hop around from this to that. But when it came to watching that race and being in the facility for the better part of 5 hours, he was all about it. Thought it was cool.
Well, is that the incentive that got you to write this new book? And I will show it right here. I just so happens I have a copy.
Me too. Imagine that.
Well, gee whiz, I didn't know I bought you one, but I hope you enjoyed it. Is his young age and showing an interest, is that what really got you going to write this book, The Legend of the First Super Speedway? It's written by Mark Dill and illustrated, I thought, by me. Some of the friends that I've had read his books, and you did the drawing, didn't you? It was Mary Lynn Smith that did the drawing. Yeah. So kids don't get blown away. They look at the picture and say, oh, that's something I could draw. So their attention is to the book. I think it's a really neat book that you have written that kids will understand.
Yeah, I think so. And yeah, I mean, Toby's influence certainly, it just made me think about it more. And again, if you think about what's out there for kids, especially younger ones, well, there's not much. And it's like, well, all of us ought to step up and try to, satisfy their curiosity and engage them and tug them along. I mean, you and I didn't get interested in racing by having our interests ignored. So, those were nurtured. Like I said, my dad, he was not about me going and jumping in a car, just very much against it. But it was a family thing for us to go to the 500 every year. And that's why I have 50 years. I mean, I was very young when I started. So it's a generational hand-me-down. When I was at the Speedway, by the way, and it was the first 500 that I was working on, well, the second, I came in a matter of weeks before the 2010 500. But the 100th anniversary, and I asked some of our IT guys that have the databases and stuff, that can we find somebody who can trace their family back to the first 500? And they worked on it and they couldn't, but they found someone from 1912, and she's, still a ticket holder, too old to attend. She did, like a lot of older people do, continue to order and then give it to their children and grandchildren. And her dad was Bert Dingley, who raced in the Indy 500 one time back then, and a pretty noteworthy road racer in his day. And so you just look at how it's passed down through the generations. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners could say, oh yeah, my dad bought tickets in 1929, so we just got to keep that generational link going.
Well, I got to tell you, this book, in my opinion, and I read a lot of kids' books, it's my speed, but it's 36 pages and it covers a lot in that lot of time, which a kid will, their attention span can last 36 pages. And looking at the pictures and asking, what's this and how does this and so forth. Mm-hmm. I think it was a brilliant move on your part to do that. And I thought about that when I got your other book, and I passed it around to people. And, wow, how did this guy find all this information about the three guys before they even had dirt to move? And I said, you'd be surprised. Go to his first legendary, first super speedway, and look at his website. You'll see. And they cut, gee, Christmas, where did he get? Some of these are absolute original photos.
Well, I'll tell you just a brief comparison. At one point in my career, I was running the web communications for Blue Cross Blue Shield, North Carolina. And I realized then they didn't have 1/10 of the content that I had on my site. And it really drove home the point to me just how big the site is. I mean, how much is on it. And, there's probably a lot of people who spend the rest of their life reading all that, but it's all original content. It's the product of hours upon hours over years of, sitting in a library and sifting through microfilm. And after I left the Speedway, I stayed in Indianapolis for another, 9 months. And I was hitting that Marion County Public Library every day. And they had machines where you could look at the microfilm and then press a button and digitize and put it on a thumb drive. And so that's where I collected a lot of it. And it being, I guess, what people would call primary research, as opposed to reading a book. I mean, the more I learned about it and then reading other books, not to be critical of them, but then you notice, oh no, that's not right. Somehow they got, or somebody will use a book as their reference for their own book. And it's like, well, you're just repeating what that person said, and who knows where they got it. So I think a good study has to come with what you would call primary research, stuff that was written on that day.
And you managed to do that. So if you read the original The Legend of the First Super Speedway, it amazed me, because I'm thinking to myself, he had to just dig and dig to get some of the actual quotes that were said at the time on the day that they were said.
Yeah.
By the journalists that wrote it.
Yeah. I mean, I include quotes attributed to Carl and Barney and a few other characters, Henry Ford, that I just lifted from the newspapers. Some of it was my interpretation. I mean, I don't know exactly what was said in Carl's office when he and Jim talked about Prestolite, but I have a general understanding of how that meeting went down and how, Carl was always quick on the trigger. Allison was the person who grounded him. And he said, I'm going to take this home, because they were worried about the things exploding, because the acetylene gas in them was an explosive gas. And he took it to the Washington Street Bridge and chucked it on the rocks below. And it just dent the can, but it didn't blow up. So Jim went down, fished it out, brought it to Carl's desk and plopped it down, and said, we're going to go in business. And so the first real headlight was born. And but I learned a lot. I mean, a couple of the guys like Jerry Fisher, who's a distant relative of Carl, wrote the best autobiography on Carl, better than Carl's wife's book. Yeah, easily. She was so vain that she claimed to have been 15 years old when Carl married her, when she was actually 24. But she didn't want people to figure out a real age. So she stretched things. But Jerry did a serious academic review, and he had tons of personal papers and so forth. And I spent a few hours just kind of interviewing him on the phone to get some background. And William Nolan, who a name you might recognize, but a number of his books, including Logan's Run, were adapted to cinema and were quite popular. And he was a best-selling author. And I was fortunate to get on the phone with him. A common friend arranged that. And it was just less than a year before he passed away. And he was so gracious, and he had done such a study of Barney. And he what I use those guys for a lot of times was just to confirm, is this it? Is this what they were really doing? And Nolan just said, Mark, you can do anything you want with my book. You can plagiarize it. I don't care. I didn't, but he was just so open. He's, don't worry about using anything you learned from me. No attribution needed. So, you run across people that are very knowledgeable and prove to be indispensable in getting to that detail you're talking about.
Well, your book is available, the original book, the full-size book for the adult reader, which I have passed around, and people were thrilled. As a matter of fact, they bought a copy so they could give to their kids, because I said, when you're done, I want it back.
Yeah, tell them to buy their own, though.
I've had a couple of people that read this. In fact, one of them read the thing while we were having lunch. I said, wow, this is great. I got to get one for my kids. So having said that, this is it. Where is it available?
Well, markgdill.com if you like an autograph copy. And I also want to note, you have the paperback there. The hardbound is coming out the first of next week. So we have a paperback and a hardbound option. And I'd really prefer people buy it from markgdill.com, because it's also available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and Walmart. And they take a big bite out of my, profit on it. So instead of me earning, 10 10 times less than I would if same price, but they just take such a big bite. It's not nearly as profitable. But that isn't why I'm writing this stuff. It's my legacy. It's my way of paying it forward. Like you were asking me about why am I fascinated in this time period, and I think I addressed that. But I can sit down and talk history on any era, especially of the Speedway. I still love it. Obviously, it's changed quite a bit, but every year I go back for more and drag my family along with me, and it's just a wonderful thing to share because my two daughters, they don't pay any attention to auto racing the rest of the year, but they are Indy 500 fans. And I think if you go around and you talk to people, and I'm not sure I fully recognize this when I was at the Speedway, but when you go around and you talk to people, most of the people in the fans are not real race fans. They're Indy 500 fans.
Right.
And, in terms of trying to market, I'm probably going to butcher her name, but Allison Malagton, who Mark Miles brought in, she's kind of an unsung hero in my opinion. So I applaud what she's done in terms of, reactivating the city. Because when we were growing up, people would decorate their yards like Christmas. And now, unless you're on the west side, it's not quite that way. But she's made great inroads in doing that. And of course, getting the downtown activated too.
Yeah, Allison Lighlington is one, you're right, one of the best. I've talked to her on a number of occasions, tried to corral her again, but I think Roger's figured out how good she is and how valuable she is. She's busy a lot.
Hey, give her something to do instead of talk to you, huh?
Yeah. I hadn't thought of that, but maybe that's right. I want to thank you for your time. I think, and I highly recommend this. If you're in a race family, you got young kids or grandkids or great grandkids and wonder, what are you doing that for? Here's a way to introduce them to them, something they can understand. It's at their level, which is my level, and get the idea of what motorsports is, and then have more interest. Say, yeah, I'd like to go see that. So I recommend it. I've read it. Friends of mine have read it. One of them read it while we were having lunch, I might add. But it's a well-written book, and your first one, the Legend of the First Super Speedway, your first book was really very good.
Thank you. And in the children's book, and I know you know this, it's scaled down to about the level of a third grade reader, but it's the same story. Yep. We take a lot of the content that's most suitable for adults in the original book. Of course, we don't include that, but it's not necessary. And the essential facts are there. And I think it's a great lesson for kids because, and in the original book, I hope this comes through, it wasn't like these guys were encouraged by everyone. There were a lot of people working against them. In fact, the subtitle, The Battle for the Soul of American Auto Racing, that's really what that's about. And so they kept their heads down and they were determined and they believed in what they were doing. And I think those are great messages for children.
Yes, I agree. Well, I know you got to get your exercise in, so you get your running form.
You're right. I'm going to the gym after this. Can I put a plug in for, I'm going to tilt the camera. We've got apparel and accessories, like coffee mugs are pretty cool. And they're 20% off right now this week. And it's the art of that Mary Lynn Smith, and thank you for mentioning her, the art that she produced. And we've taken that same art and put it on coffee cups and sweatshirts and hoodies and t-shirts like what I have here. And it's, it's just another thing that enriches the experience. So,
and you get those by going to markgdill.com.
Yeah, go to markgdill.com and then at the top of the homepage in the navigation bar, click on store and it will take you to our online store, which is hosted by a company called Spreadshirt.
Spreadshirt, how clever is that?
Yeah, well, obviously, when they first got started, they were about T-shirts, but like a lot of companies, like Amazon was first about just books. They realized that they could reach a diverse set of markets.
Well, I applaud you for both of the books that you have put out regarding the Speedway. I encourage people to go to markgdill.com, get yourself a copy of either the soft cover, which is what I have, or the hardcover, which you said will be out next week. And get yourself a coffee mug so you can remind yourself there's a race coming up on May 28th, I believe it is. You got the cup to remind you. Mark, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Don. I always appreciate it.
Tell your wife we appreciate her letting you put the vacuum cleaner and dust pan aside for this time. So,
well, you're right. Actually, you have spies. I'm the guy that is labor in the house. She's the genius. In fact, she did the layout and design for the book. So, she has played a huge role in this. It's been a family affair.
Well, thanks for your time. Look forward to meeting you. Catch up with you somewhere along the way.
Yeah, well, we'll be in town for in May, if not sooner. So I'll always let you know.
All right. Well, as is said on your voicemail, as you conclude the message, cheerio. So my guest, Mark Dill, thank you for being here. I'm your host, Don Kay. We will be back again. Stay tuned for us. Till the next time, cheerio.